So anyway, it's Christmas season, right? Are you guys excited? Anyone excited for Christmas? Honestly, yeah, the young kids are like, yeah. Parents are like, oh gosh, I have so much to do still, right? Like we did the parade last night. That was fun. Anyone do the parade? That didn't come and say hi? You were in the parade. We had a couple people in the parade. It was the first ever Camden, Wyoming Christmas parade. So Camden and Wyoming managed to get together for a little bit. You know, it's historical. It's precedent setting. Get used to it or don't get used to it. Those of you who don't know, there's a long history between Camden and Wyoming, and I'll tell you at a later date. But you know, I love Christmas. Anyone? Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a fun season. I saw a Facebook post that said, make no mistake, Christmas season starts November 1st, and Thanksgiving is just the halftime. And I think that's how a lot of us treat it, right? And some of you know I have a tree business, and we sell Christmas trees on a farm, and which sounds like a lot more fun than it actually is. Like, the selling part's not too bad, but the stuff you have to do to get the trees ready all year. Anyway, it sounds like a fairy tale. I live on a Christmas tree farm where deer play in the fields. I think people are decorating earlier and earlier. We were cutting trees now before Thanksgiving, but there's this kind of general sense of excitement. And it's funny in some ways because I think a lot of people celebrate Jesus this time of year, and honestly, probably a lot of them have no idea who Jesus is or what he did. And so every year we kind of take a look at the Christmas stories in the Gospels and in Matthew and in Luke. And so we're going to be looking at Jesus, who had a big impact on society. He never traveled very far from his home. He was born to teen parents. He had never held political office, but we mark time in the Western world by his birth. Although we're off by a few years because they never thought to do that till later, so we were a couple years off. He may have been born 3 or 4 BC because we just didn't do it till later. Anyway, but there's a song, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. You guys like that song? God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Sound very familiar? No? Okay. One of the last lines of the song says this. It says, which brings tidings of comfort and joy. And so this year, you know, we kind of grabbed that as a title, and it comes out of Luke 2:10, which says, and the angel said unto them, we'll get to this later, fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be for all people. And really, Christmas is this greatest story that's ever told, and we're gonna back it up. We're gonna unpack some things, and so we're gonna start in Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 5, and it talks about a guy named John the Baptist who's born. Now, maybe you've heard John the Baptist. I do a joke where I throw water on you, knock knock, who's there? John the Baptist, and maybe that's you're only hearing of John the Baptist. It's a dad joke, and I get to throw water at people, so it's a good thing. But you know, maybe you don't realize how he factors into the Christmas story. And so in chapter 1, verse 5, it says this: when Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abiah, and his wife Elizabeth was also the priestly line of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all the Lord's commandments and regulations, but they had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. And so this was a long time ago. They had no children. Now, in that society especially, there was sort of a little bit of a social shame to it. We were talking about that. Normally we do things in the men's group, and then it kind of shows up in the sermon. And this week is going to be no different because we were actually talking about this passage yesterday in the men's group, and we're talking about in that society a lot of times, you know, people would be like, well, is there something wrong with you? Who sinned? You know, not the vast medical knowledge we have where we kind of understand some things. And so it was like kind of a social shame, and it was hard because if you didn't have kids, they were like your social security of the day. You know, you have kids because they're the ones that are going to take care of you as you age. And so it was kind of a concern that way. And, you know, they might even have blamed Elizabeth in that society and told, you know, Zechariah to remarry. And they were very old, which if you look in the Greek, it means very old. that ship had passed, if you know what I mean. Some of us who are, you have kids when you're younger, and then you get to an age, you're like, no. And there's an age where even if you think no, your body's like, no, we're done with that. And so it was old. You think retirement years, not, just married, dragging cans from the back of a donkey. Anyway, so I don't know. I tend to try to think of those people in those days. What were they like? And I don't know. Were they like the kindly, nice, old, friendly neighbors that you have, or were they like the cranky old people? We were at a certain social function recently. Some of you were there, and the music was a little loud, and all I could think of was, they need to turn this music down and get off my lawn. I'm like, I am officially at the age where I want them to turn the music down because I can't talk. Some of you are younger by 6 months, so maybe you don't feel that way. But I'm going to keep your ball. Anyway, I don't know how you picture them, but they were an older couple, childless. It says this. It says, one day, Zechariah was serving in the God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priest, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. And when the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. And so there were a lot of priests by this time in Israel's history, possibly 18,000. And so they were kind of like, there's the active duty ones that are kind of there on duty, but then there's the reserves. These are the reserves. Some of you are in reserve military things. So they just kind of come in for his 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year kind of thing. So he's there. And possibly the only time in his life he gets kind of tapped for get to go in and burn the incense in the Holy of Holies. This is kind of a big deal. So this is kind of his big pinnacle career moment, if you will, probably. And he goes in there. And it's kind of a quick in and out, just kind of not the restaurant, but you just kind of go in, do a few things, you're going to be coming out. He's burning incense, which is sort of representative of the prayers going up to God. And so it says, while Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. And fear is the normal, and we've talked about this, the normal reaction when you see an angel. I grew up in the era of the show Touched by an Angel. Anyone? Yeah, it's that's kind of how I picture angels, because culturally it was like, oh, they just show up, and it's like a person just suddenly starts to glow and you realize they're an angel. But generally in the Bible, when an angel shows up, people are terrified. I'm not exactly sure what they look like. It's just got to be a pretty scary sort of moment. And so angel shows up, and I kick when I'm scared. So I don't know if he kicked at the angel, because I've told you, don't ever. If you ever come into church, everyone's got codes to this building, man. I'm in here sometimes. People show up doing stuff. Sometimes you don't know I'm here too, and I don't know whether to jump out and scare you. Maybe you kick too. Let me know if you're ever in here, because shoot me a text so I don't kick you, which would make it awkward. You'd Facebook post, Pastor Jeff kicked me. Again. And so there's this sudden shock and fear. And some of you know what I mean. Suddenly there's someone else in the room kind of moment, and that's sort of the moment. Zechariah, I'm going to call him Z. Z's sitting there, and all of a sudden, boom, there's an angel. But the angel said, don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife, Elizabeth, will give you a son, and you are to name him John. So your wife Elizabeth will give you a son. You don't need a new one. You're getting one from her. An ultimate surprise. I mean, and think about this for some of you who are in our society, a lot of people are choosing to be childless, but it's generally through history, it's been something, it's a natural thing. And those who are people of faith, Zechariah and Elizabeth would have been, probably prayed thousands of times for this, right? Hey, God, kid would be great. Kid would be great. Your friends who got married after you were having kids, you're like, kid would be great. Kid would be great. And it's just kind of not happening. And then you kind of get to the point where you're kind of thinking, well, it's done. And in their case, they were old enough that ship had sailed. That time had passed. It wasn't going to happen. And suddenly an angel kind of shows up and says, hey, here it is. It's sort of it's a big Christmas surprise. I love Christmas gifts that are surprises. A baby would be a real big surprise. This is a big surprise. Kind of like money in a pocket. You ever you put on old jeans you last time you wore, and isn't that a great day? I remember a couple years ago, I found a Butterfinger in my winter jacket. It was like a Festivus miracle, you know? I was just like, and you better not lay a finger on my Butterfinger. It was good. And you name him John, which is, it's great because, naming a kid is so hard. Maybe some of you kind of instantly knew. I felt like there was a lot of pressure because if I name my kids something and they get teased, so I try to think of every way people could tease my kids about their name. And, maybe some of you didn't. I don't know. But it's a lot of pressure. And John kind of means like God is gracious. And it says this, you will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or other alcoholic drinks. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. And the not touching wine, there was something called a Nazirite oath, and you see that in the book of Judges. Samson was a Nazirite. It was sort of this special thing, and they didn't touch that, and they kind of grew their hair long. So, John's going to look kind of crazy, like a homeless dude. We're going to see him later. He shows up in the New Testament eating locusts and wild honey, So there's this, I picture him I always picture when he grows up, he's like this crazy man. Kids today kind of let their hair grow out. Maybe he had a big mullet or something. I don't know. Little locust and honey in his beard, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's kind of the picture of who he's going to be. It says, and he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God. And if you know the story of John later on, I love John because he calls people to repentance for God. He's preparing the way for Jesus. Ultimately, he gets to kind of this cool ministry. But then, when the Pharisees are showing up, he's like, "You brood of vipers." So the religious people show up, he calls them a pile of snakes, He's a very bold dude. But he ultimately, it's showing the kind of life he's going to lead. It says he will be a great man filled with the spirit and power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. And so the spirit and power of Elijah, that's a whole lot of stuff. But if you go into the New Testament and you look at who Elijah was, there's all these things who he was, and there's a lot of things that we miss when we read the New Testament because maybe we don't have the full background of things. And so in Malachi 4, it says this, look, I am sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arise. His preaching will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. And so he's this, John becomes this forerunner of Jesus. Ultimately, he figures into the Christmas story because he's born about the same time. And as we're going to see, Elizabeth's like a cousin to Mary. So there's some connection. But ultimately, he's this forerunner for Jesus. And he gets this cool thing. And so after all this stuff, Zechariah, now picture this. You've just been told great things. Great things are going to happen with your kid. You're going to have a child in your old age. An angel of God is speaking to you inside the temple. Imagine that moment. Like, it's powerful, right? You'd be like, oh, this is incredible. What does Zechariah say? How can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man now. My wife's also along in years, which I found out don't say at your high school reunions, because people are like, no. Denise and I are okay. We're getting a little long in the tooth, but some of you get that. Zechariah said to the angel, how can I be sure of this? And there's no doubt, right? There's this moment where he's like, I don't know, maybe this isn't going to happen. We're a little bit old for this. Like, we tried. It didn't work. And there's a story. You ever see Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? If you didn't, there's something wrong with you. No. It's like, I love the cartoon. And in my day, it only came on once a year. Like, anybody grow up in that era? I know it's like our kids are used to, like, you put a DVD in or you stream something. It came on like once a year. Everyone at school was talking about it. You were all excited because if you missed Rudolph that night, it was done. You didn't get to watch it for another year. And then I've got the uncut version. Oh my gosh, the uncut version has some other stuff in it. Yeah, there's an uncut version of Rudolph because they had to shorten it for TV. Anyway, but there's this great scene in there with the Island of Misfit toys and everything. And the little Rudolph, this doll says, I haven't any dreams left to dream. It's like that sad moment, right? That's kind of where they are. They've dreamed of this, and they might the ultimate hope of being, with God for eternity. But they really kind of felt like the ship has sailed. It hasn't happened in this life. It's not going to happen. And a lot of times, I think a lot of us, it's like you can kind of look at his answer and think, oh, that guy. But do we kind of also have that sometimes where we really sort of lack that? And there's all these biblical stories of the precedent, Sarah and Abraham, Rebecca and Isaac, Samson's mother, Hannah, Samuel's mother, barren people who ultimately get children, but they're in this doubting moment. And again, before we get on Z for his doubt, how many of us have felt that way? We had a dream for life that just doesn't come true. It can be hard to feel like you want something. You pray for it, and it never seems to come to pass. And you wonder if God's listening. You wonder if it's this dream that's going to go unfulfilled. And I dare say their dream for their child turned out different than they planned. And the timing was certainly different than they planned. But ultimately, it's fulfilling God's purposes. And it says this, and then the angel said, I am Gabriel. I'm sorry, I picture Fluffy now because I'm a comedian. I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. For my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. Hey, you want a sign? You want to play some games with me? Here you go. You got 9 months of charades to play. This is like, they couldn't text, text his wife, hey, Angel showed up and take a picture. They couldn't post it to the gram, they had to, kind of figure out a way to talk. And it says, now, meanwhile, because remember, all this is happening, he's supposed to do what? Go in, offer a little incense, come out. They're all waiting for him. There's a tradition, a legend you may have heard, where they tie a rope to the guy. It's actually not true. I did some research. There's no historical reason that we think it's true, but the thought was that you tie him to a rope in case he died, and then you could fish him out because what would happen. But sorry to ruin your thought for that. Another thing I can ruin for Christmas for you. You're welcome. But why was he taking so long? Meanwhile, people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why it was taking so long. Dude, you just got to light some incense. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Again, charades. And they realized his gestures and his silence that they must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. They're not the smartest guys, but they figured something because he couldn't talk anymore. And so, he makes gestures. He's playing Pictionary charades. 2 words. Sounds like and it says this, when Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterward, Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. How kind the Lord is, she exclaimed. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children. And so she goes off in seclusion. Didn't want to hold up the pregnancy test and show. They didn't have those then either, Didn't do a big gender reveal party then. Came out, but she comes out with a 5-month baby bump. And if they'd had Instagram in the day, people would be like, is that a Photoshop? Eat too many tacos. I don't know. And so you got to get this picture of this happy couple with a kid. It's the start of this great thing. Now, it's interesting. Having a Christmas tree farm, there's all kinds of interesting stories and things. And I remember, I've told some of you the story. I won't mention the name of the actual person from here. But one year at the Christmas tree farm, we had somebody come out late, and they wanted a very large tree. And I'll tell you later if you ask me who it was. But they came out, and they were the background singer for a very famous artist who wouldn't need a last name. And their best friend and backup singer lives in Delaware, of all places. But we have low taxes, so why not? And it was interesting because when she through conversation, I was helping her find a tree, I figured out who she was. And then I recognized her too, because I was like, oh yeah, I've seen you in the background of the videos. Because I have this lifelong fascination with background singers and bit part actors. You know what I mean? There's this guy who's third villain number 3 or something in a movie. And you're like, I've seen that dude in another movie. And he's you do your whole career of you're never the star. You're just and I wonder about the background singers. What's their life like? Apparently they live in Felton. But and some of you are like, what? Oh, actually, it was Frederica. But, I'm kind of fascinated with this. And so, because, some people have this whole career and they're just sort of this, this background person. And really, they don't get to be maybe the main person, but they still lead a pretty cool life. And that's who John is. John is not the main character of the story. You know, he's the background singer. He's the backup guy. He's the opening act, if you will. But ultimately, he gets to play this huge, cool part. And so ultimately, at Christmas, we celebrate the artist. We celebrate the Messiah. We celebrate that Jesus comes. Now, John doesn't get to be the Messiah, but he gets to announce the Messiah has come. And John the Baptist, we're going to see as we read the Gospels more throughout the year. We won't during this series a lot, but John the Baptist comes on the scene to announce the Messiah, ultimately that Jesus is coming. And that's what we celebrate this season. We celebrate God's fulfilling his promise. He's bringing, as we'll read later on in Luke, bringing tidings of comfort and joy. Christmas is this time to celebrate and share who Jesus is. You know, the happy old couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, God put them in a place to proclaim their good news to their neighbors and friends and show God's faithfulness. And God puts all of us in a place where we can do that. We're all on this mission. And this season is really a time where people are open to hearing the story of Jesus. And so I'd encourage you, celebrate it, spend time contemplating it, but also invite a friend to hear the greatest story ever told.